In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. It's a pleasure to be with you here, episode 54 of Veracity Hill. I'm very excited about the things that we're doing here, the topics that we've been bringing to you week after week. If you haven't had a chance yet, last week we did an interview with a former Chicago Cub outfielder, Matt Merton, and on his story of his journey through as a professional baseball player, not just here in the States, but over in Japan, where he had lots of success. And I hope that you will listen to that episode and share it with your friends as well. And today we've got a great show coming up. We're talking about whether Jesus is the only way. Is Jesus really the only way for salvation? Let me put it that way, for salvation. Sometimes we say, is Jesus the only way to heaven? But sometimes that gives some ideas that maybe we're going to spend eternity in heaven, which I don't think that's quite what the Bible says. At any rate, so I am running solo today. Chris has the week off, and so I do have the live stream up here on Facebook. If you're following along live, thank you for those that are watching here. So I'm doing all sorts of things here during this episode, running the sound and whatnot, and but before we get to the main thrust of the show today, I just have a few announcements. So first, if you want to participate in today's show, if you want to ask a question, you're welcome to do so on Facebook. Hopefully I've got the questions coming in here and I'll be seeing those come in. You could also text me. Just text the word Veracity. That's VERACITY to the number 555-888. And I'll get your text messages. And if you've got a comment or you have a question, either for me or for my guest, I'd be welcome to read those on the air here. Or you could even call in if you want to have a discussion with us. The number is 505-2-STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. And then lastly, let me say this. So in the month of August, Veracity Hill is going to be doing a small fundraiser. I'm going to be looking to raise some more money, especially for recurring gifts. And so before I begin doing that, I would love to get your feedback on the show. If you are a listener to the show, I know there are many out there that listen live and even more that listen through the downloads, the websites, the podcasts that they get to their phone. I would love to get just a comment that you might have to say about what we're doing here. If it's the types of questions that we're exploring, if it's the wide variety of guests or topics. Tell me something that you like about the show and why you want to have other people contribute to making this show happen. So that would be great. Okay, now let me introduce to you Dr. Robert Stewart. He is the Greer Hurd Chair of Faith and Culture at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. Bob, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Kurt.
Yeah, now before we get into the discussion whether Jesus is the only way, first tell me a little bit about what's happening there at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, or as I call it here, I just call it NOPST, but maybe you guys have some nickname down there.
Yeah, well, in Louisiana, we pronounce words in many different ways. In New Orleans, almost nobody in New Orleans says Nolans, though. I don't know where that comes from. You may hear New Orleans or New Orleans, but nevertheless, I direct the philosophy apologetics program here at New Orleans Seminary, and I'm also the chair of the Greer Hurd. I hold the Greer Hurd Chair of Faith and Culture, and that's a program where we bring in an evangelical or traditional Christian scholar of some renown to dialogue or debate with a non-Christian or with a liberal, and
that's theologically speaking.
Right. And And so we've been doing the program now. We're in our 14th year, and our first year was a dialogue between N.T. Wright and John Dominic Crossan on the resurrection of Jesus. And in November will be our 14th Greer Herd Forum.
Nice.
And that will include, again, N.T. Wright, dialoguing with Simon Gathercole from Cambridge University on the meaning of Jesus' atonement. And
nice.
N.T. Wright has written a new book, The Day the Revolution Began, which is all about the atonement of Christ. And it's been a bit controversial in some circles. And so Tom and Simon will dialogue on Friday night, November 10th, about the topic, and we will live stream it, and we'll take questions and so forth and so on. And then the next day, November 11th, Saturday, we will come back and we will have papers by Kevin Van Hooser and Michael Horton and Doug Moo and Edith Humphrey. And then Tom and Simon, N.T. Wright goes by Tom to those who know him. Tom and Simon will interact with each paper presenter. And so it's a great time. And then we have a bit of Q&A with each paper and so forth. And so that's going to be a fantastic event for us. And we've been publishing with Fortress Press. So a number of our forums are in print, so you can purchase them. Plus, we add authors to the group that is actually on campus. So even if you come to the event or you see the live stream, you may not get every bit of the dialogue that eventually takes place. And we've had some pretty significant scholars add additional articles.
Nice.
People like the late Wolfhart Pannenberg, people like John Hick, the late John Hick, people like Alistair McGrath or J.P. Moreland, Nancy Murphy.
And now you guys also, I was going to say, so you've got this sort of academic conference or roundtable, but then you guys also do a apologetics conference in January, right?
Right. We have a pretty significant apologetics program here. We have over 100 majors in one apologetics degree or another, between 100 and 200, closer to 100 at the moment than 200. Kind of a moving target. And so we offer everything from a certificate in Christian apologetics to a PhD in Christian apologetics.
Nice.
We have three master's degrees in apologetics plus a master's degree in Islamic studies, and then also a doctor of ministry degree.
Okay.
And so, but the big event that we do event-wise in apologetics is our Defend Apologetics School, and that takes place every year in January, and so we especially target collegiate students for this, but it's open to everybody. So we have our students coming, we have undergraduate students from across America coming, we have just general public coming.
Yeah,
like sort of thing.
Like former NFL tight end Benjamin Watson.
Exactly. Yeah, I had watched Ben on television, but then he came to our conference unannounced.
Yeah,
but,
that was a few years ago, right?
Yeah, he was playing for the Saints at that time, and the word was getting around pretty quickly. Ben Watson's here. Ben Watson's here.
Yeah, that's cool.
And he's such a good person. He's done so much in this community, also in Baltimore. His faith is genuine, and he's done a great deal in terms of racial reconciliation with worldview as the basis, and very intelligent, articulate
Yep.
fellow. But the thing about our conference that I think makes it really unique, number one is it's 5 days, and so you get a ton of teaching and training and so forth, and then we bring in really good people. This year, some of our plenary speakers will be Gary Habermas, Craig Hazen. Christopher Brooks is going to be one.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Tim McGrew.
TMG, the great Tim McGrew. Yes, excellent.
Well, one of the things that we take very seriously here in New Orleans, and it may be because we're a majority African American city, is urban apologetics.
Yeah.
And this is an area that a lot of apologetics programs have neglected, I don't think through intentionally so, but we will have Lisa Fields from Jude 3 here. Christopher Brooks is a pastor in
Detroit.
Detroit.
He's written the book, Urban Apologetics.
He's written an excellent book on urban apologetics.
Yep.
And some others that have special training and experience in this regard. So that's going to be one of our emphases this year.
Great.
But because we have a passion to train young people and collegiates in particular, the charge for the general public for the whole conference would be $120. And for 5-day
for
conference,
5 days, yeah, that's that's good.
Yeah,
that's a good price.
And we record every minute of the conference, and we live stream the plenary sessions.
Mm-hmm.
But the recording is roughly 100 hours of apologetics teaching, and we make that available to anybody who registers for the conference.
Wow.
You couldn't buy that for $120.
Yeah.
But for collegiate students, we waive that $120 fee. And so the cost for a college student to come to defend is zero.
Yeah. And now, is that any college student, or is that just a student enrolled in your program?
It's any college student.
Wow. And, that's a great deal, Bob.
It's any undergraduate student.
Yeah.
And then we also make a special package deal for them as far as room and board, because we know they do have to eat and sleep.
Yeah.
Although collegiates apparently sleep less than most people. We give them 5 nights lodging and 13 meals for $200. And
yeah, nice.
You can't beat that with a stick.
That's great.
So that's some of what we're doing here in apologetics and missions and evangelism at New Orleans.
Yeah, that's great work. Awesome. Well, all right. So let's get into the main topic here for the show. We we want to talk about whether Jesus is the only way, and what does that mean? In John 14:6, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." And elsewhere in the scriptures, we see that Yahweh tells his people that they shall have no other gods before him, that he is to be the head honcho, the only one that they worship. And in fact, we see, as you read the Old Testament, that there is punishment for when people go astray and they worship other foreign gods. So what does that mean then? Especially in our relativistic society today, where that's true for you but not for me, or you might also hear, this sort of acceptance of religious pluralism in terms of its truth value, that there are many ways to God. How do we respond to folks that bring forth these objections? All
right. Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. And I do think it shows that all of our apologetic conversations are going to be situated within a culture, within a time frame, and so forth. I was looking at a quotation just a little while ago from the first World's Parliament of Religions, and one of the major Christian speakers, William Wilkinson, said this. And I quote, "Of any ethnic religion, therefore, can it be said that it is a true religion, only not perfect?" Christianity said no. The attitude of Christianity, therefore, towards religions other than itself is an attitude of universal, absolute, eternal, unappeasable hostility. And so roughly 125 years ago, that was the widely accepted Christian position. Now, I might want to pick a bit of a bone with Wilkinson to say that we have to be hostile toward other religions. Although read in context, he's not saying that Christians should be hostile to non-Christians. He's saying Christianity as a belief system is not going to fit with other belief systems. But in today's culture, that is highly offensive. And several of my degrees are from state universities. So I've been on large campuses. I was a student taking doctoral seminars at private universities and also state universities. And I experienced this firsthand, that people saying, that's just offensive, that's intolerant. And I think there is something that they are recognizing. And what they're recognizing is that if Jesus is the only Savior, then every other so-called Savior is a false Savior.
Yeah.
And if Jesus is the only Savior, then all of us are incomplete and inadequate on our own. And we live in a culture where we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to say that we can handle everything, just get, the problem is if we have a problem, counseling will fix it. And the gospel says, no, counseling won't fix it.
Yeah.
You're fundamentally broken, that sort of thing. And so when we say that Jesus is the only Savior, what they tend to hear is that we are right and you're wrong. And they think that's arrogant. But I think they also feel this way because thinking about truth has changed in our culture. And so frequently I hear things like, well, there's no such thing as truth, or there's no such thing as objective truth. And my answer typically is, really? Is that true? Because if there's no such thing as truth, then it's not true that there's no such thing as truth. And if it's not true that there's no such thing as truth, then there is truth. But what I think people are really trying to say, one thing that when they say that is nobody can know the truth. And that's a different sort of statement. But again, the response is similar. Really? Is that true? Because if nobody can know the truth, then how can you know that nobody can know the truth?
Right. So there's sort of this self analysis, this self test that it doesn't seem to pass, right? And because it doesn't pass, it's self refuting, right?
That's right. It's self refuting, or as philosophers would say, self referentially incoherent. And
that's the term I was looking for.
When you tell people that, their eyes roll back in their head. So what I tend to say with people who think there's no such thing as truth, or wonder if anybody can know the truth, that sort of thing, is I tend to ask them a question. And it's a really simple question. And the question is this: have you ever been lied to? And of course, people say, well, of course I've been lied to. But notice this: if there's no such thing as truth, then there's no such thing as a lie.
Mm.
But everybody knows that they've been lied to. And of course, all of us who are truthful know that we've all lied as well. So truth, we really all do believe in truth. What we're cautious about is other people's thinking about truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I frequently what people mean when they say there's no such thing as truth or nobody can know the truth is you can't be absolutely certain that you know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think maybe they raised the bar to an unrealistically high level, something like
Right.
like you would need an algebraic truth or mathematical truth.
Yeah.
But you don't need to be certain about truth to know, not even to important things that you build your life on. I'll tell you a little story. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago maybe, one of our faculty members had a college-age son who was going through a crisis of faith, and so he came to me and he said, "I want you to, I'd like you to go to lunch with me and my son. He's been going through some things and he's questioning his faith, and I think maybe you could help him." And I said, "Well, I certainly hope that I can." So we went out to lunch, and so I just started asking him questions. And then after I kind of thought I knew where he was headed, I said, "So let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly." And this is one thing that I would recommend to people as you dialogue with people,
Okay.
that you don't jump to a conclusion, or that you don't come in with a canned one-size-fits-all answer or rebuttal, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Which even apologists, sort of lay apologists, we can do that sometimes. We just have these canned answers that are ready to go.
and they may be wide of the mark, and then somebody then they leave thinking, well, he doesn't even really care about me,
Right.
or my problems.
Right.
And so I said, so let me make sure I'm understanding you. I said, so what I'm hearing is you think there's pretty good evidence for Christianity, but you're not certain it's good enough because you're not absolutely certain that it's true, that you have some rational doubt, that sort of thing. He said, that's it exactly. And I said, oh, so the problem is certainty. The problem is certainty. Okay, I said, so let me ask you a question. You're a young guy, single. Would you like to be married? Oh, yeah, I'd like to be married. Okay, when you get married, would you like to be married to a woman who was always faithful to you, or would it be okay if she cheated on you from time to time? I want a woman that's 100% faithful to me. All right. How could you be certain?
Yeah, good.
He said, well, I guess I couldn't. And I said, now your problem is you can't be certain, but Christianity calls for an absolute 100% existential commitment. And the certainty isn't matching the call for commitment. But so does marriage. So I guess you're never going to get married, huh? Oh, I'm going to get married. But can't be certain. And right there, I could see the light bulb come on in his mind. His eyes lit up, and he saw that you don't have to have absolute certainty. Even where existential commitments are involved, where complete commitment. Marriage is not 50-50, it's 100-100, that sort of thing. And so I think there are some lies floating out there that sound really good. Things like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, one, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. So where is the extraordinary evidence for it?
Yeah.
But secondly, it's just simply not true. We make extraordinary claims on less than extraordinary evidence. cosmologists do it all the time, and it's only about the very fabric of reality, the nature of the universe, and we have cosmologists who radically differ, and yet they have some evidence. They're not making unreasonable conclusions, that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think we just have some bad thinking about knowledge.
We might even come up with easier examples, shall we say, than cosmology. How about the claim, "I won the lottery"? Oh, that strikes me as an extraordinary claim if someone says that. But it doesn't require extraordinary evidence. It just requires ordinary evidence in order for that extraordinary claim to be proven. So, yeah, I mean, even just these regular day examples would help to fight against these. They're not adages, but yeah, they kind of sound nice. They sound like they might be right, but upon further analysis, they just don't hold weight.
Right, and so I do think some of this is perhaps a legacy of modernism, of a bad sort. I think overall modernity has been very good to Western culture,
Mm-hmm.
but there are thinkers that have gone overboard, and then the reactions have gone overboard in the opposite direction. I'll tell you a story about a doctoral seminar I was in at the University of Texas in Arlington over 20 years ago. This was in the 90s, and so the first day of class, the professor comes in, and he passes out the syllabus, and he explains how the seminar is going to work. And then he lectures for about 15, 20 minutes, something like that, which is, there's not a lot of lecturing being done by professors in PhD seminars. They're mainly facilitating
Discussion.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so but the first sentence out of his mouth was, "Rationality and will are illusory." And everybody around the room just seemed to accept it. I was so stunned that I actually wrote that sentence across the top of the syllabus because it just blew my mind. Let me be clear about what he was saying. He was saying, you think you're rational, but you're not.
Yeah, it's all about whatever you want to do. And
right.
I was just engaging in a discussion with a colleague, and he was telling me a story about someone that had come up to him and said something along the lines of, "Arguments and evidence don't persuade people." And my colleague said, "Well, why do you think that?" And the guy proceeded to give an argument and evidence for why he thought that. And of course, he wanted my colleague to agree with him.
Well, that's and I do grant that people are not always rational. None of us is.
Sure.
But and then the second half of it, will is an illusion.
Mm.
You think that you freely choose to believe or to act, those sorts of things, or not believe or not act. But that's an illusion too. That's basically coming out of your culture.
Mm.
And so my question after he finished was, if rationality and will are illusory, on what basis will we be graded in this course? And he let me know pretty quickly that he really wasn't doubting his rationality or his will. He my rationality and my will. And so what we find is lots of this talk about truth and certainty and knowledge and power and hegemonic discourse and so forth. It's not about truth. It's about us. Mm. But the truth is, no pun intended, we can't live without truth, and we don't live without it. The way that we live reveals that deep down we believe there actually is truth. Mm. And that we can know it and other people can know it. And, we know we've been lied to. we know we've lied.
Yep.
When we go to the pharmacist and turn in the prescription, we don't expect the pharmacist to close his eyes and go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We trust that the pharmacist can read doctorese and give us what the doctor has really written that we should get. When we take our tax receipts to an accountant, we trust that the accountant do real numbers because we know the IRS believes.
Yep.
And truth.
Hey, Bob.
So
we've got to take a short break here. But when we return, we're going to explore more of these topics and questions. And if you're following along with us, some of this might seem a little deep to you. Oh boy, we're talking about truth and how you can know things, and how does that really relate to Jesus? Well, the tough truth is that a lot of these objections that you might face have these, philosophical underpinnings, and it's important that we recognize them so that we can recognize how they are mistaken. And so to guide us through some of those thoughts, Dr. Bob Stewart's here with us talking about these things. And if you want to comment or question, there are a number of ways you can get in touch with us. You can give us a call. The number is 505-2STRIVE, or you can shoot me a text message. Just text the word Veracity to 555-888. All right, we've got to take this short break, and when we come back, we're going to explore more of these philosophical underpinnings and also maybe touch upon the topic, what about those that never hear the gospel? So stick with us.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Hello, I'm David Smith, the Executive Director of Illinois Family Institute, a state-based Christian pro-life and pro-family public policy organization. I want to invite you to join us as we seek to be salt and light to a dark and rapidly decaying culture. You can do that in a number of ways. For example, you can join our email list to get timely alerts and great cultural commentaries. You can like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, listen to our podcasts, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can attend one or more of the special events and forums we host in different parts of the state. We do all these things to encourage and equip Christians in Illinois. You see, we need you to help us fulfill our mission to boldly bring a biblical perspective to public policy. Our faith requires us to be bold, speak truthfully, and love our neighbors. Join us. Visit IllinoisFamily.org to learn more.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
All right, thanks for sticking with us through that short break from our sponsors. If you are interested in learning more about how you can become a sponsor or a patron, just go to our website, veracityhill.com, and click on that patron tab, and you can read more about ways you can donate, just a couple bucks a month. Or if you want to become a sponsor with us, have your logo up on the website, and maybe even have an ad played here week after week on our show, you can do that and learn more there at the website. All right, so I'm here with Dr. Bob Stewart, and today we're discussing whether Jesus is the only way for salvation. And in the first half of the program here, Bob's been talking about these sort of philosophical underpinnings for these objections that we might see in our day-to-day conversations. And so let's continue with that, Bob. I didn't mean to cut you off too much there, but I know we had to take our break here. So tell me a little bit more here about. I'm trying to reflect back now where we were. You had told us that story.
Yeah, Yeah, we were talking about truth and exclusivity.
Yes.
And one of the things about truth is that it excludes error, falsehood, because it is particular.
Yeah.
And people recognize this with math. They recognize it in science, those sorts of things. But when it comes to religion, people are a little more hesitant about that. They tend to think that it's maybe more like I prefer chocolate ice cream, you prefer vanilla, somebody else prefers strawberry, that sort of thing.
Right.
But so one of the questions that sometimes I get, particularly on university campuses, is so you think Christianity's the only true religion? Have you investigated them all? If you have investigated every true religion, how can you say that Christianity is the only true religion?
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. And well, the answer, of course, is I have not investigated every single. Nobody has, and nobody could. Religions are popping up all the time.
Every day.
I can't even name all the religions, and nobody else can either. And I do this for a living. So, but the thing is, you don't need to. Once you've found the truth, you don't have to look in all the other places that it possibly could be, but isn't. I'll give you a story. The first year I was on faculty here, the seminary, we had a dog back then, and our dog was kind of stupid and misbehaved, and not a bad dog, but just got out of the yard a fair amount of the time. And so one night about 3 a.m, the phone rings, and this is back when we actually had landlines. And so I stumble out of bed to the phone, and it's our campus security. My wife and I rent a home from the seminary here on the campus. It's a large campus. And they said, "Do you have a dog?" Yes, we have a dog. Is your dog in the back in your yard? And I don't know. She should be. Hope so. Will you check? And, okay, so hold on. So I put on some clothes, get a flashlight, go out in the backyard. And sure enough, our dog is not in the backyard. So I come back and say, no, our dog is not in the backyard. Well, look on your carport and see if the dog on your carport is your dog.
On your carport.
Yeah. And, my response was, why didn't you start right there? If I look on the carport and see my dog on the carport, I know my dog is not
in the backyard.
And, we do things like this. We don't ask someone who says that 2 + 2 is 4. How do you know? Have you checked all the other equations?
Have you checked 2 plus 5 equals 4?
Right. And so what we see is we're not being arrogant. It's not arrogant to say that you have the truth that other people need.
Yeah.
In fact, we do it all the time. When we give directions, we do it. We do it in chemistry. We do it in math. We even do it in history or ethics. Now, history and ethics are not like chemistry and math. They are debatable. But when we debate over history or ethics, we show that we think there is a historical truth and an ethical truth, or we wouldn't be debating it. And so arrogance is not saying that one thing is true and anything contrary is false. Arrogance is mistreating people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
And so it's certainly not arrogant to say that I was blind, but now I see, and you're blind, and you need to find the same cure that I found. Someone who leads a cancer support group is not arrogant for saying other people need help emotionally as well as medical treatment to get through And what we see in the gospel is that Jesus is the cure for spiritual cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
And that all of us, that each and every human being without Christ is a dead man walking.
Mm.
So what's worse than arrogance is having something that can save a life
And not sharing it with
not
people.
sharing and this is an area that, interestingly enough, Penn Jillette and I agree on. Now, I don't
Yes.
know Penn Jillette personally. I'm a fan. He's the taller. He used to be like 2/3 of Penn and Teller, but he's lost weight now. He's just one half. He's just the taller half.
Yeah.
But I love magicians, and I think Penn and Teller are just great. But both of them are committed atheists.
Mm.
And Penn Jillette several years ago put out a video blog talking about a Christian who had come to one of his concert performances. I don't know if they come magic acts.
Sure.
And afterward, came up and gave him a Gideon New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, this man was sane. He was sober. He looked me in the eye. He'd written his number and email inside the little Bible he gave me, marked some verses. And he said, I appreciated that. I don't have respect for people who don't proselytize. And then he said, if you think that I'm going to hell and you have the answer to keep me from there,
Yeah.
he said this. He said, how much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them that?
Mm-hmm.
And, from the mouth of an atheist, something that many Christians need to hear.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, even though it's reasonable, doesn't mean that it's going to end. I saw the Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who's an interesting guy, and I really like a fair amount of his work, actually. But he said this in a program on television with a Southern Baptist leader, not myself. He said, I am absolutely against any religion that says that one faith is superior to another. I don't see how that is anything different than spiritual racism.
Huh.
It's a way of saying we are closer to God than you, and that's what leads to hatred. Now, that has tremendous rhetorical force until you actually look at what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And the rabbi was apparently oblivious to the fact that what he just said was that religions that don't say they are superior to others are superior to those that do.
Right.
And so we see that. But I think there's also this mistake made that frequently people mistake an attempt at persuasion for coercion.
Mm.
And, if you coerce somebody to believe something, number one, they don't actually believe it.
Yeah.
But rationally, it's fallacious. We actually have an informal fallacy called the ad baculum fallacy, which is an appeal to the rod.
Yep.
If you don't do this, I'm going to spank you, that sort of thing. Interestingly enough, a good friend of mine is the Jewish New Testament scholar Amy Jill Levine. And here's what she has to say to counter the Rabbi Boteach. She wrote this in an academic work. She says this, exclusivism, and she's talking about Christian exclusivism, particularism, Jesus is the only Savior. Exclusivism should not be morally dubious. What I would find more morally dubious is my insisting to another that his or her reading or presuppositions, because they are not pluralistic, are somehow wrong. The evangelical Christian should be free to try to seek to convert me to Christianity. Such an attempt is biblically warranted and consistent with evangelical exclusivist theology.
Mm-hmm.
I remain free to say thank you, but no thanks. I would not want someone telling me that my cherished confessional traditions have only limited value. I would not presume to do the same to another. And I think she's got it right. So tolerance is not saying that all religious views are equally correct. In fact, tolerance demands disagreement. You can't be tolerant without disagreeing. We don't tolerate things that we agree with. We agree with them.
Yeah.
And a proper understanding of tolerance is respecting someone's right to disagree with you.
Right.
Intolerance is insisting that they not disagree with you. And so I think these things are kind of underneath the surface when we talk about objections to Christianity.
Yeah, good.
And so
I was going to say, when, we're talking here about the importance that evangelism plays when we have the truth. And so that's a good segue perhaps here. We've got a question online from Kyle.
Okay.
So Kyle asks this: if Jesus is the only way, why doesn't he make it more obvious? And so maybe that question, I know that gets a little bit into the hiddenness of God, but it's also a good segue into the discussion of the problem of the unevangelized as well. So maybe we'll properly take Kyle's question first and then move over into a discussion on those that never hear the gospel. So if Jesus is the only way, why doesn't he make it more obvious?
Great question. And it is a long topic to discuss in full. I've actually done a fair amount of work in the last year, not as much as I would like to, on the problem of divine hiddenness. But that we do have some great young philosophers that are working in this area. Travis Dumsday has done some very good work in this regard. But let me take up the question. And I think it is pretty apparent that God exists, and I oftentimes we have this idea that people are lost because they have rejected Jesus. So that's the reason that they are lost, and that it's unfair of God to condemn them for not believing something that they couldn't believe because they never heard it. And I would agree that it would be unfair of God to send a person who's never heard of Jesus to hell simply for not believing a message he's never heard. But the question is that the basis of our separation from God? And the biblical answer is no, it's not. That's good news. Jesus is not the reason people are lost.
Right.
Rejecting Jesus is the reason that lost people continue to be lost, rather than the basis upon which they are lost. Paul says it very clearly in Romans chapter 1. He says that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures.
Yeah.
So that's 5 or 6 verses that I just read there from the book of Romans. Now, the interesting thing to me as a philosopher is there is a ton of knowledge language in there.
Mm-hmm.
The wrath of God is revealed. Men suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. His invisible attributes, eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood, so that they are without excuse. Though they knew God, they did not honor him. There's epistemology just flowing, theory of knowledge just flowing all through that passage. So I think actually Alvin Plantinga is correct that because of sin we are damaged. Now, when you talk to an unbeliever, he's not going to accept that answer. You can't just say, well, the Bible and sin, and that's the answer.
Right.
I think that's the reality of the situation. When I talk to people who have genuine questions about why isn't God more obvious, these sorts of things. And sometimes Christians have these questions too.
Yes.
Sometimes it seems sometimes even in my Christian life and other people's Christian life that the very moments when you most need God are the times when he's most difficult to find. So I tend to ask people questions like, what God are you looking for? Because we really haven't said a whole lot when we say God. I sometimes ask atheists, will you please tell me about the God you don't believe in? And frequently they don't believe in a God I don't believe in either.
Yeah, right.
And then I will ask some questions like, where are you looking? The Bible tells us the sorts of places, and God is everywhere, but the Bible tells us the sorts of activities that God participates in,
including the bringing of thunderstorms too.
Yeah, we have a storm here in New Orleans. Not unusual in the summer, but it's not a hurricane.
Oh, that's good.
So I actually think that. So I will challenge people to pray, and they say, well, why should I pray? I don't believe in God. Well, if God doesn't exist, he won't do anything to you just because you pray. But it's not irrational to pray. If you fell off a cliff at night and grabbed onto a root out of the side, you would cry out in hope that somebody would hear you up there that could come help you.
Yeah.
If you were on a raft at sea, you might fire off a flare, even if you didn't know that somebody could. Those are not irrational things to do. But God tells us that he is present with us in a special way in worship. So I encourage people to go to church and be open to the fact that God could speak to them. But I to cut this short and get back to the main issue, I think Pascal got a lot of things right. And Pascal said, God has made himself not so hidden that he can't be found, but that there's enough evidence for those who will see, but there's enough obscurity for those who don't want to see. And so, that comes out of his famous statement about the heart has its reasons that reason does not know. And I think that's what the wager is all about. It's not an argument for God's existence.
Right.
I think it's an argument that a rational person would want God to exist. But then Pascal's advice is then go to church, take the Mass, do the prayers, and then God himself will personally confirm his reality to you. Does that make some sense?
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. So what does that then mean for people that never hear the gospel? So he talked about how sin has damaged human nature, and yet God has made himself evident to all men. But it seems like those that never hear the gospel don't know about the revelation of Jesus. So they're sort of left with incomplete knowledge, shall we say. And what do you think? What do you think God does in those circumstances when he is evaluating and on the day of judgment? What will he do with those sorts of people?
Well, I think that may be above my pay grade. But I do think we do have to get back to the condition of the human heart. That what Paul is talking about in Romans 1 is the revelation of God that is available to all people in all places at all times. Now, the gospel is not that sort of revelation. The technical term that we use in theology for the knowledge of God that's available to all people in all places at all times, we call general revelation. The gospel is an example of special revelation. Special revelation is available to particular people in particular places at particular times. And so you could have seen Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee or hanging on the cross if you were there at that point in time in that location. But if you were in Siberia, then you couldn't see him, or if you were at that point in time 100 years before or after, you wouldn't see those things. Those things happen. So the gospel is special revelation, but here's the deal. We've had the gospel for nearly 2,000 years.
Yeah, right.
Why are there people that don't know? And
or if I could slightly modify that, why are there people that still don't know?
Right, and if the figures I've heard from missiologists are correct, there are more people living on Earth today who have never heard of Jesus than lived on Earth when Jesus walked on the Sea of Galilee. And that's on us. And so that is totally on us.
Yeah.
But I do think that God is capable of putting people in the right place at the right time for people that have an openness, if such people exist. Okay, so I think sometimes we wonder about salvation. Well, no one is ever saved because of how good they are, or how moral they are, or how intelligent they are, or how spiritual they are. Okay, we don't deserve salvation. If salvation were only for the worthy, nobody gets saved. Salvation is God's free work of grace, not something that we earn because of our behavior or because of our intelligence or our innate spirituality, that sort of thing. I do think part of the answer, but not the most important part, but part of the answer is getting the question right. The question isn't why are only some people saved. The question is, why is anybody saved? And the answer is because God is loving, God is gracious, God is merciful. He saves people who don't deserve to be saved. But I do think that the Bible teaches us that we can trust God to deal righteously with everybody, that He is righteous. Now, we may not understand how that works. We may not even understand what being righteous is. But if they respond to the light that they have, then God can be trusted to give more light. Now, that's not saying if they respond to the light that they have, then God will act as though they respond to more light. It's saying God will give them more light.
So that's different than the what's called the inclusivist position, right? So you're not saying that if they respond accordingly to what they have, that God will save them. You're saying that they'll be given more light. Is that right?
I think that's correct. Boy, we're bordering on opening up a whole can of worms. But I actually, now this is a time for me to get a commercial in. I actually edited a book, which goes through a number of these positions.
Oh, nice.
Entitled "Can Only One Religion Be True?" Which takes up a number of these topics. But what I'm talking about, I would say it's not inclusivism. It's more of an optimistic exclusivism. It's definitely a particularist kind of theology. And let me give you some biblical examples.
Sure.
So this is something I'm just making up. In Genesis, and a lot of times we do. We want God to be some way, so we imagine that He is. In Genesis 18:25, before God judges Sodom and Gomorrah, we read this: "Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" And so we have a hint there. But what we see in the New Testament is something like Acts 8. In Acts 8, Philip has been involved in mass evangelism, very successful mass evangelism, and the Holy Spirit tells Philip to leave the area he is to go to a desert road where he encounters one Ethiopian eunuch. And the Ethiopian eunuch is coming from Jerusalem. He's been to Jerusalem to worship. He actually has at least part of the scroll of Isaiah, because we find that out in the passage. And what you don't find out in the passage, but you can put together from Josephus and historical context, is what happens to the eunuch when he gets to the temple. He's told he can't go in because he's a eunuch. And, but in Isaiah, there's a passage that says, and eunuchs will be welcome too. The eunuch should not say to himself, "I am a dry stump," that sort of thing. And so then Philip runs up and asks him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And he says, "No, but how could I without someone to help?" And then Philip gets in the chariot, preaches Jesus, comes
baptizes
salvation.
him. Yep.
I mean, that's a miracle. They come up on water in a desert. Baptistry in a desert. But then Cornelius in Acts 10 he's a Roman, and God prepares him, and He prepares Peter separately for Peter to bring him the gospel. And God tells Cornelius through a messenger to send for Peter, who will tell you what you need to know to be saved.
Yeah.
And so what we see are examples. Now, let me say this very clearly. Some people theologically may push back and say, yes, they had special revelation. Cornelius had attached himself to a synagogue. The Ethiopian eunuch had the book of Isaiah.
Right.
That's not general revelation, that's special revelation. And I grant that that's absolutely the case, but The inference is if you respond directly, God will give you more light. Now, I'll tell you a story, a couple of stories.
Sure. And then we also have a question from James who texted in.
Okay.
So
well, let me do this first, and then we'll take that question. How about that?
Sure, sounds good.
These I think, really make it contemporary. Randy Ridenour is a friend of mine who teaches philosophy at Oklahoma Baptist University. He's also an Army chaplain. So he was stationed in Afghanistan, and he's leading a Bible study. And most of the people in the Bible study are Americans. Some of them are GIs, some of them are contractors who are there. Mm-hmm. And one of the contractors tells him this story. He said, this morning, I got to my office and I found this Afghani man in my office. And I didn't know him, he didn't know me. He said, are you American? And I said, yes, I am. He said, I had a dream in which I saw a man with wounds in his hands and feet. Huh. And he said to find an American, and the American would tell me who he was.
Wow.
And so the Christian contractor leads this Afghani to faith in Jesus because he didn't know it was Jesus. None of that. He just was told, if you want to know who I am, find an American. And then another story, and I think this gets at some of the emotional difficulty that we need to recognize people have who come from other religions. I was speaking on this topic to a group of college students here in Louisiana, and a Chinese student from Tulane came to me, and she was not a Christian, but she'd made some Christian friends. She'd begun going to church, and so she was very close to becoming a Christian under conviction. And so she said, the thing that troubles me is that if what you're saying is true, then my grandparents are in hell.
Yeah, right.
And everyone else in my family is headed there. And that is a powerful emotional factor. And our ability to suppress the truth is extreme. And so I prayed for wisdom, and I said to her, her name is Penny, and so I said to her, well, if it is true, do you think your grandfather would want you to join him? And she said, well, that is something to think about. And I shared with her from the Gospel of Luke with Lazarus and the rich man, where the rich man is in Hades, and he asked Abraham, send Lazarus to warn my brothers so that they don't come here. And so that was in the fall of, I can't remember which year. And then in the spring we had the Greer Herd Forum, and I was at the Greer Herd Forum, and she came up and she said, I'm a believer now.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think God can be trusted to give more light when people respond to the light that they have. And I'm not saying that anybody responds appropriately to general revelation. But the truth of when you read the Bible, it's not a story of how we seek for God. It's a story of how God seeks for us, from Genesis to Revelation. And I think that's the answer. So what was your call-in question or texted in question?
Yes. So James texted in, and so he's asking, what about aborted babies and miscarriages? What happens to those babies? I think he's meaning to say here, what do they go to heaven or to hell? Because I think what you're proposing here is people get some light, they get more light. Well, what about those that are unable to get any light at all? Right.
And frequently that is question that comes up, as do questions about Old Testament saints, people who lived prior to Jesus. Well, my own position is that there is such a thing as an age of accountability.
Okay.
And now, that is not something that I can show you knockdown verses in the Bible for.
But it's a theological conclusion made upon some inferences from scriptural support.
Yes. Yeah. But I would contend that all aborted babies are saved.
Okay.
Now, theologically, we've got all these different schools of thought: Calvinism, Arminianism.
Yeah.
Charles Haddon Spurgeon, a very famous Calvinist Baptist British pastor of the
London Tabernacle. Yeah.
of the 19th century.
Yep.
Preached a famous sermon on this, and he basically said all infants all children who die early on are elect. I don't know that we need to take that route, but there's a route that a Calvinist could go.
Sure.
Because we don't know who the elect are. So that sort of thing. But they absolutely would go to heaven. I remember, I think it was in the 80s. My first degree was in music, but I got over it. The late great Andre Crouch, African American Christian musician, wrote a song that a lot of people thought was just a regular love song. They say, well, he's lost his faith. He's out doing soul music, that sort of thing. And it was entitled "I'll Be Good to You, Baby." It kind of sounded like like a typical soul song. Mm-hmm. But what it was about was aborted babies. It was God saying, "I'll be good to you, baby."
Interesting.
And so that would be my answer.
Okay.
But the ultimate answer is we can trust that the God of justice and righteousness will be just and righteous toward all.
Yeah, good. Well, Bob, we've already gone over for our time today, but boy, this has been an excellent conversation, and even just sitting here and learning from you, listening to you. I don't know, folks that are listening here, I've been taking notes throughout this time today, and hopefully you have too. And so let me thank you for coming on the show and sharing your not just your knowledge, but also your wisdom when you apply your knowledge in those conversations that you have with people. That's a real blessing. It's God's gift to you. And so thanks for sharing your knowledge with us here, and I pray that we can then apply it in our own lives.
Kurt, could I do one more commercial?
Sure, yeah.
Our most of the classes that we do, all of our apologetics degrees can be earned either residentially here in New Orleans or
online,
as distance.
Yeah.
But the distinction between most of our online classes and the typical online class is that most of our classes are going to be synchronous online classes.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means it's like streaming. It's like Skype.
Gotcha.
So I teach several classes. Over the last several years, I have taught several classes where I have a classroom of students in the room physically with me, mm-hmm. and others who log on, and I can see and hear them real time. They can see and hear me real time, mm-hmm. and so it's interactive. It's dialogical rather than simply being a course in the box and the internet serving as the box.
Right.
And so if any of your people would be interested, any of your listeners would be interested, they should contact me or contact the seminary, find out about these sorts of things.
That's right. Yeah. And if you just want to go directly without having to search Google, the website is nobts.edu, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. So nobts.edu.
Right.
Bob, thanks again for coming on the show today, and we'll have to bring you on. I know as you are an apologist, though you're chiefly a professor. That's your occupation, but you've got a number of other topics that you speak on. So we'll have to keep in touch and bring you on the show sometime in the future.
Yeah, we thought we were going to talk about universalism today, didn't we?
That's right. We didn't even get around to it.
Thank you for having me, Kurt. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Bob. God bless, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, God bless you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that does it for the show today. I am grateful for the continued support that I receive from our patrons and the sponsors that we have. Again, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to our website, veracityhill.com. And let me just give you a preview of what's coming up next week. So funny enough, I received a question this week. All right, and this person had a question. We'll call her Jay. Her question was this, and I'll just be brief here. Her question was, Jesus talks about how his kingdom is not of this world, and he scolds Peter for taking out his sword and cutting off the ear of the Roman guard. And so what does that mean for us as Christians? Are we to engage in politics if Jesus' kingdom is not of this world? So I want to thank Jay for her question, especially because we've already scheduled next week's show, which happens to be, in fact, upon religion and politics. So it's so convenient that you've asked that question, and I hope you'll tune in next week. We're going to be talking about that relationship between religion and politics, and we're going to have an author from the Relevant magazine, Christy Wilkinson. We're going to be having that discussion. It's a great question. Let me just give you a quick teaser. My own position is this: even the political realm is under God's authority. Okay, that's the teaser for next week I'll give you. So, Jay, thanks for commenting and questioning in on that. So next week we're going to be talking about the relationship between religion and politics. All right, so that does it really for the show today. Again, I'm thankful for the partnership that I have with our patrons and our sponsors. Let me list them for you. Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, Evolution 2.0, and Ratio Christi. And I want to thank our guest today, Dr. Bob Stewart of New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And if you want to learn more about the programs that they have, you can go to nobts.edu. So, lastly, I want to thank you, above all, for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.